Many of you have probably heard the old story of a piece of the Maine coastline that was long troubled by treacherous shoals in the surrounding waters. It had for years been a point where unsuspecting ships foundered and many sank. After years of these tragedies, the local residents decided to build a lighthouse, a point assigned to guide people around the shoals to safety. And it made all the difference. Ships no longer were lost, and even in the worst storms, there was a reliable light to guide them on their way. The group that ran the lighthouse called themselves the Rescue Society because they knew that people's lives depended on their work. But as years went by and charts and ship guidance became more sophisticated, the lighthouse began to seem increasingly unnecessary. The Rescue Society group would still go out to the lighthouse to have their meetings, and they kept the light going, but they lost their passion for their work. They became more of a social group, meeting less frequently, and eventually the lighthouse fell into disrepair. Finally, they stopped even going out to the lighthouse. They just met to tell old stories and have a good time, and the light in the lighthouse went out. And sure enough, in the coming months when the storms came, ships began still to wreck on the shoals that were right there along the coast. The group began to see that what seemed relatively unimportant and something that they had lost their passion for was in fact still essential as one more piece to guide people on their way and to save human lives. And so the Rescue Society rediscovered its mission and called itself back to the urgent task for which it had first signed on. And they went to work to refurbish the disheveled lighthouse for the new work ahead. It's the perennial work of all rescue organizations to take a look at their life, to seek to understand where they are, to periodically reclaim their vision. They need to remember why they are doing what they're doing and what stands at risk if they fail to maintain themselves and their passion for their work. Churches, of course, are rescue societies. For 2,000 years, we've been in the business of reaching out to the struggling and the lost and the broken. And we've been in this business for 2,000 years of being a lighthouse, a beacon, so that people can have the light they need, have the wisdom, have the confidence, have the love they need to steer by the best way they can. We citizens of this 21st century need to know how to steer to the safe water of our own shifting landscape. We need to know for our time, where are the spiritual shoals that bring danger to us? How should we gauge and chart our courses forward as we seek in this time and place the depth and peace and fulfillment we so utterly long for? That is the critical mission of this rescue society. We in the church are called to be instruments of God's Spirit so that the whole human family can discover a harmony and peace in themselves and in their world and with their Maker. Our scripture this morning tells the story of a people called by God to join the rescue society called church. God called the people of Israel at first, delivered them from slavery, led them to a promised land, and God expects from them in return their goodness, their faithfulness, their obedience as followers. It was as simple as that. But it doesn't take much reading of either the Old Testament or the New Testament to see that God's people, called and blessed and loved as they were, kept losing the vision, kept forgetting who they were, kept losing their whole focus, just as that Lighthouse Rescue Society did. They started arguing about who's right and wrong, who's in and who's out, what rituals are better and what other rituals. And that lasted through the Old Testament years and certainly in the New Testament years as part of the life of a rescue society, to be embraced by a vision, thrilled by the call, but along the way to weaken and lose perspective and find minor things becoming major things. Compassion and faithfulness fade away, and rules and rituals become the one thing, and one that is entirely beside the point. So all through the history of our scriptures, God sent prophets to call people to reclaim their vision, to call people to remember just why they had been called by God in the first place. There are great passages, you of course will know, of God trying to recall people to the rescue society God had envisioned. There is Hosea, for example, having God declare, "I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." And in the book of Amos, God erupts, "I hate, I despise your feasts, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." And in the book of Micah, God is crystal clear. "He has told you, O mortal, what is good, to do justice and love kindness, and walk humbly with your God." A rescue society being called back to the core work, to remember, to be re-energized, to go on with the calling they have. Several hundred years later, after those prophets, a prophet named Jesus walked into the grand temple in Jerusalem. The absolute heart of his faith was there, and he walked in, looked around, and erupted in rage at what he saw. They, too, had lost their vision. In the courtyard into which he stepped, there were booths where adult males were paying their annual temple tax. There were tables where Hebrews were changing coins because the Roman coin carried an image of the emperor. Then he walked further into the chaos of cattle and pigeons and oxen making chaotic noise, being offered for temple sacrifices. All of this was, in its way, legitimate according to Hebrew practices. But it all got to Jesus, who knew full well that these transactions were being manipulated for profit by high priests and emissaries of King Herod. And Jesus let loose, turning the tables over, knocking down the booths, flailing a whip in every direction, not being a nice man we're used to knowing. He just lost it. Those old prophets had said that a Messiah would come who is like a refiner's fire, and here he is in raging fury. God's rescue society had forgotten why it existed. John's gospel puts this story at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, but the others say it happened during the last days, just before Jesus went to his death. He had come to heal the human race, to bring a kingdom of justice and compassion and love. The stakes for this new movement called church couldn't have been higher. And he seems to know, as he makes his way, if this is at the end of his story, that he will give his life to change the game, to end the call for sacrifice of animals, to turn his sacrifice of love into our call to make our lives sacrifices of love. Today, of course, we are holding our annual meeting. I know that you know that because you wouldn't be sitting in these pews at this hour if you didn't know that. So today we pause from our regular patterns to take care of the church's business, to hear reports on our life, to choose our leaders, and to reflect, even if briefly, on where we are as a community of Christians. Today, the Trinity Church Rescue Society is taking stock of how it's doing at its mission and how its lighthouse is holding up. First, a word about our context. God has called us together into this Christian community in the early 20th century at a time of immense potential but immense challenge. I read recently that the pace of social, global, and technological change is moving so fast that most new things in our culture are obsolete in 3 years or less. We have begun to find that church-going is going through a massive shift, not just here, but across Christianity as we know it. Things are looking very different. Church-going represents today a bold, intentional decision in a culture that once assumed it was automatic. More and more people are finding other things to do on Sunday. According to many informal reports from people I know who clearly weren't in church on Sunday, we have some fierce competitors out there on Sunday morning, like soccer, like sleeping in, and like that tool of evil, Starbucks. My friend said to me, "Do you have any idea how busy Starbucks is at 10:30 on Sunday morning? It is the place to be." The fastest growing religious designation now is unaffiliated, a number which has doubled since 1990. But I came across a surprising statistic that even though the millennial generation of those in their early 30s and under is still showing the lowest level of religious affiliation, but it's showing just about the highest of all in their interest in the spiritual journey and spiritual practices, as high as the older, greatest generation, and seems to be going higher yet. There is still a hunger to seek and draw near to God. And look at what an opportunity we at Trinity have to draw people into this life. Once upon a time, missionaries traveled around the globe in order to spread Christian faith to the unchurched. Now all we need to do is step out the front door, and there they are. All reports are that more and more people are moving back into the city, moving into apartments. We have a significant Hispanic community. We have a significant homeless community. We have a significant community that lives in and amidst all those who come through Copley Square, the shoppers, the business people, the students, the people who make this the center of their life as it is so much the center of Boston. There is much inviting and welcoming we can do. When's the last time you invited someone to come with you to church? In recent years, we at Trinity have been making major steps in becoming a 21st century church. We began a major new journey in Christian formation last year with the Year of the Bible, an adventure that captured the imaginations of most of us. This year, we're focusing on the key practices for living our faith we call pray, love, serve. We've been introducing new services such as Taizé and Sung Compline, some new approaches to the 6 o'clock service. We're even introducing some fresh music in our services, like that lovely hymn we just sang. We're beginning to find ways to pray differently. We're even beginning to offer fresh little pieces to the 9 and 11:15 service as we try to find a language for our time for people to come and worship with us. And we're slowly working up our courage to talk about ourselves as disciples, people who know they are called to follow a Lord of love and are willing to grow with it, to learn about it, to become responsible for living that faith for themselves, and are eager to find ways to spread this life-saving good news to those around us. In what we've called our year of discovery, we've been asking important questions about our future in these 3 major working groups: the Task Force on Mission, the Liturgy Study Group, and the Building Committee, and we've committed ourselves to discerning our future together in every way possible. Our own Trinity Boston Foundation, that does such amazing work for our city's youth, has also committed itself to major growth in its programs, which will include wider and wider involvement of Trinity parishioners in its vital work. Good things are happening, but we still have big questions to ask. What is finally our response to this city? What is our response to the gaps between rich and poor? What are our responses to broken down school systems? How do we fully respond to the homeless on our streets? We have many questions to ask, and we are called to be part of raising and addressing just those great issues. And beyond all this, careful work has proceeded in enabling us to care for Trinity's own lighthouse, this beloved building that has been a channel of God's love and beauty for so long. Our parish leaders have been working very hard in negotiating an amazing gift you've been hearing rumors about along the way, and you'll hear some very good news about it when we gather in our annual meeting, a key part of being responsible for a faithful future. So these are exciting times, challenging times for sure, but we're a lot bigger and a lot better resourced than the early disciples were, that small group that broke out, living discipling lives, being able to talk about their faith, taking the time to know and grow in their faith, and from that flowing out to make a difference in the lives around them. They did that in their small numbers. We can do it with our highly resourced large numbers. God is calling this rescue society to be alive and fresh and creative. As I've thought and prayed about where we are right now in our lives, I came across a quotation from a playwright named John Patrick Shanley. I hadn't heard of him. And he says this: "I've simply discovered that in key moments in this life, you must find courage in yourself in order to move forward and live. It's like a muscle, and it must be exercised first a little and then more and more. All the really exciting things during the course of a lifetime require a little more courage than we already have. A deep breath and a leap is what it takes." It's quite a journey we're on together, this living our Christian faith in Copley Square. What a privilege to share our life in this particular lighthouse, this beacon of health, this community that seeks to gather the holiness and goodness of God. I look forward to the adventure ahead with a deep breath and a leap, and seeing where God is going to take us next.